Welcome back to Below the Forest Floor. My name is Nancy, and today I'm going to be telling you guys personal, scary stories. My whole family has had incidents with the supernatural. I always knew that I was kind of a scaredy cat, and I didn't want to see anything like that the way some of my family members would see things. So I used to just tell myself, I see nothing. I will see nothing. Well, I should have been a little bit more specific, because although I never have seen anything, like in front of me, I've heard a lot of things. So one of the times I want to talk about was when I actually thought I was needing to go to a mental hospital for a bit. And it was because in my home, it was a very haunted house. Lots of weird things happened all the time there. I didn't put two and two together because our walls were fairly thin, our house wasn't built very well, and I always just chalked it up to neighbors. But then when my husband moved into our house, and his hearing is much better than mine, I cannot physically hear out of one of my ears because of a medical condition. So if he hears it, I hear it, and if I hear it, he really hears it. And I'd always heard people talking in my house for like years. I always just assumed it was the neighbors and just kind of left it at that. Didn't ask anybody about it because I didn't need to. It was just what I heard. I remember one night when I first brought it up to him, we were sitting in the back room of my house because that's where the small apartment was. And I was like, hey hun, do you hear that woman crying? I wonder what's going on. Do you think we should call the cops? And he just looks at me and he's like, what woman? And I'm like, don't you hear that lady crying? It sounds like there's a lady crying like in the other room, but it's probably just from outside, right? And his computer was on the only wall that we had facing towards a neighbor. And he looked so confused. And I was really creeped out because I was like, I always assumed these noises were neighbors. And because we had the same neighbors for a really long time. And his reaction of confusion was like, what are you hearing exactly? And I was like, well, it's a woman crying. She's sobbing, and all I would hear is, like she sounded like she was in so much pain and anguish. Like something terrible had happened to her. My mom and grandmother had been living at my grandma's ranch, so they weren't there at the time anymore. And my brother was 5 rooms away from us in his room where he would close the door, which is a very thick, heavy door, and it was nowhere near. It was like 2 hallways in between us, and my house was very weirdly shaped, but he was super far. You would not be able to, we couldn't hear him talk at all to his friends or anything. But I was hearing it like it was just right in the next room, and there was no one there. And so my husband went outside because when we first met, he still is kind of a skeptic, but when we first met, it was like more so. He was not gonna not believe me, but he was a little bit more logical. He wanted to find out for himself what could have been happening. So when he saw I was a little freaked out, he went outside to go and check to see if there was anybody out there. He was looking around on all sides of our house, and he didn't see anything. And he came back in. He's like, do you still hear it? And I was like, yeah. And so he went to the next room, went to go check on my brother, and my brother was asleep. And he came back and he's like, you still hear it? I was like, yes. You did not see a woman in the next room or something? And he's like, no. And I'd been hearing weird voices and noises, disembodied voices and noises for so long in my life, of crying and talking and whispering. And I always chalked it up to, it's someone I'm not paying attention to, talking and mumbling or whatever. And then this happened, and I was 24, 25, and I realized, oh my god, these voices I've been hearing are not physical. And And I was so scared. And then I was like, what if it's me? What if I need to go to the doctor to go and get my head checked? Because what if I just am hearing voices? And so I was like, oh man, we're gonna have to go get me checked. But before we were able to do that, we ended up moving houses because we didn't feel safe where we were living at the time. And since we've moved houses out of that old haunted house I used to live in, I never heard the voices again. And I was freaking out. Like, I cried my first week of living in my new house because I said I literally thought that I was hearing voices. Like, I thought I was gonna have to go to the doctor. I can't believe it was the house that I was hearing things in. And I was so shocked and surprised. And I could not believe what was happening because I literally would just chalk it up to just random stuff, random noises from people. And I would have my husband, he would go check on multiple occasions because he likes to test things. He likes to make sure that he's checked all options. And I was the only one that ever heard the women crying or the people whispering. And it was so freaky and creepy. I still think about it to this day. And luckily, I have gone back to visit for a week one time, but I didn't hear anything, but my aunt and I saw something, which is kind of creepy. It wasn't like a full-bodied person, but it was just like a weird situation. So that's my experience. It's not, I've never seen something in front of me like my brother has, but I've heard a lot of things that I probably shouldn't, and I've experienced a lot of things. Another thing that happened was before I became a substitute teacher, before I became a teacher assistant, I was at schools as a custodian. Because I felt like if I got to know the teachers and worked as a custodian while I was going to school, it would get me a better chance to get a job at a school. I was with my custodial group that would travel to different schools and go clean those individual schools, and then we'd go back to the main headquarters. And oh my gosh, the experiences I had at these schools. I worked there for a summer and a year, and they said, we're gonna have to put you in a school soon. And that's when I decided I need to find another job fast because if all this weird stuff was happening to me with people around, I did not want to be left alone in an individual school. Because this kind of goes into the whole voices thing, how I told you guys that I've heard voices before, talking, crying, whatever. Well, this one time I was working at a school. It was during the day. It wasn't nighttime or anything because a lot of custodians work at night. It was a summer, so there weren't almost any people except for 2 other custodians besides me, and I was there to go help them with their cleaning and waxing and stuff. Well, to my understanding, we were going to be waxing the day after this happened. Everyone was outside doing yard work because there's like a lot of leaves, and they asked me to just stay inside and fill the mop buckets for them so that when they got back inside, we could just get started on mopping. And I was like, sure, I like being alone, no big deal. And they're like, we'll leave the radio on for you so that, you could just have something to listen to. And I was like, that sounds great. Well, while I'm there filling the mop buckets, which by the way, remember, I have really bad hearing. And if I'm filling mop buckets with streams of water, it's kind of hard for me to hear. While I'm filling up the mop buckets, I hear, Nancy! 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 And I'm like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And I can kind of tell where the voice is coming from, so I start sprinting, and it sounds like an emergency. And honestly, my bad, you're not supposed to run when you're at work, but I was scared. It sounded like something horrible was happening. I felt like, oh my gosh, they need me now. So I went running, and the place this voice had come from was a place that was very dangerous because unbeknownst to me, they had waxed one of the floors earlier that morning before my shift started, and they didn't put a sign up. And so I was running in that direction, and if you guys don't know this, freshly waxed floors are so dangerous. They're so slippery. If you fall on that and you fall the wrong way, you can break your head on the floor. And so I'm running towards a hall, and the floor feels like it's beginning to fall from underneath me, and I'm slipping, I'm falling, and I fall directly on my back. And I'm like, what is happening? And I feel all this pain, and I'm wondering where the voice is because it stopped. And my coworkers come in, they're like, what are you doing? You walked all through the wax. And I was like, somebody was yelling my name. It was an emergency. They're like, no, we were outside. We told you we were going to be outside. I was like, someone was yelling my name, like something horrible had happened. And they were like, oh, we're not mad at you. We're sorry that we forgot to put up the sign for the wax. We thought it was going to be done drying by now. But we should have probably told you this earlier. We leave the radio on in the school when people are here, because if we don't, there's a voice that calls their name, and usually people don't hear that voice when the radio's on. They don't hear it calling their name, so we just figured you wouldn't hear it, and I guess you did. Sorry. And I was like a ghost voice, like it's just like a random voice, and they were like, yeah, ghost voice. And I was like, oh my gosh, I wish you would have told me this earlier. Thank you for not being upset with me for running and falling on the floor. I don't know what to say to this, but I'm very scared, and I hope I don't have to stay at this school. And they started laughing, and I started laughing, and nobody got hurt, and nobody was upset with anybody else. But I was very freaked out because what am I supposed to do? Put a warning label on myself like, I sometimes hear ghosts. Please let me know if that happens around here. I can't do that. I'm not gonna do that. That's weird. Or at least people are gonna think I'm weird, you know? But yeah, from a very young age, I told myself I am not gonna see ghosts. I don't think I can emotionally, psychologically handle that. So I always told myself I'm not gonna let myself see ghosts. Wasn't specific enough. Now I hear them. But yeah, I have a lot more scary stories from myself and my family that I will be telling you guys throughout this next month, talking about ghostly things. So yeah, the next few months is going to be basically me talking about personal scary stories. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Below the Forest Floor. Feel free to give a like and to leave a review because it really helps out. I really appreciate you all listening, and I hope you all enjoyed today's segment. It's definitely different from my normal stuff. Oh, really quick shout out to my mom. It is the 24th as of today, and that is her birthday. Happy birthday, Mom!